This is Wayne Eberly, the pastor of the Dunn's Corners Church. This is for Sunday, August 16th. The Apostle Paul wrote his letter to Romans, and in chapter 14, he writes some words that are just wonderful. Verse 7, he says, "None of us lives to ourselves alone, and none of us dies to ourselves alone. If we live for the Lord. And if we die for the Lord. So whether we live or whether we die, we belong to the Lord." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Boredom can lead to some incredibly creative moments. Stuck inside for weeks and months during this whole time of quarantine, some talented young minds have set to design the most amazing tricks with dominoes. They stack dominoes up staircases and down staircases, out windows, back in the windows, around tables and chairs. They knock over buckets and balls start rolling and levers are released and the dominoes keep falling and falling and falling. It's breathtaking to watch all the work they put into it. And if you're the observer, you can sort of stand back and look at it as it spreads. You can see where it's going and how it ends up. But what's it like if you're just one domino? No one gives you a heads up. You're standing in place, doing exactly what you're supposed to do, where you were told to be, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, somebody hits you and knocks you over, and when you fall, you knock over the next guy. Next thing you know, your whole world's upside down. Julie got caught in a situation sort of like dominoes. It was a morning like any other. We were living in Houston. Houston's a big city, 5-6 million people, and so she would get up early to go to work, and to beat the traffic, she would leave really early, but knowing there was so much traffic, she braced herself by getting a cup of coffee at Starbucks in the morning. This particular morning, she went through the drive-thru. Normally, she goes inside, and with her personality, she's best friends with everybody who works, but she was in a bit of a rush, so she got in line at the drive-thru. She placed her order. She pulled up to pay. The person working at the window said, "The car in front of you paid for your coffee." Boom! She was like a domino. The car in front of her hit her, and she started falling backwards and looked behind her and said, "Oh, then I'll pay for the car behind me." Boom, boom, and it just started going, and she had no choice. The car in front paid. She had to pay for the car behind her. They were all just dominoes. Well, the next morning, she went back in the coffee shop, and she said, "You know, the nicest thing happened yesterday, and I'm just curious. Somebody in front of me paid for my coffee, and I paid for the coffee for the person behind me." Person at the counter said, 161 people did the exact same thing. Here's Domino Julie. Domino John Doe in front of her knocks her over, hits her, she falls backward, she hits Domino Jane Doe, and before you know it, 161 dominoes have all fallen over. They had no choice. The one in front fell, you had to fall backwards, knocking over the domino behind you. That's an interesting way to look at it, but it's not quite right, is it? Domino 161, whoever they were, they didn't choose to fall over and pay for Domino 162. They didn't choose to pay for the next domino, and the whole thing came to an abrupt halt. I'm not judging Domino 161. Maybe a school bus was behind him with 30 kids in it. No way I'm paying for that many. But whatever happened to Domino 161, it shows this was not an involuntary happening. Each person whose coffee was paid for, they couldn't pay the person back in front of them, but they could pay it forward by paying for the person behind them. They chose to pay it forward. It wasn't involuntary, it was a decision they made to pay it forward. Although the domino theory doesn't quite hold up, I like using the drive-thru as an example. A person does something kind for you. In response, you do something kind for another person. we don't know what happened in the person's life ahead of us that caused them to do something nice for us. And once we do something nice for another person, we don't know where that's going to go. We're sort of right in this little sweet spot, and something hits us, touches our life, and we pass it on. We don't know ahead, we don't know behind. But for a moment, we have the chance and the choice to pass it on, to pay it forward. Today, I'm preaching about paying it forward. And my sermon text is from Romans 14, verse 7 and 8. Paul says, none of us lives to himself alone. None of us dies to himself alone. If we live to the Lord. If we die to the Lord. So whether we live or we die, we belong to the Lord. And I chose that particular passage because of a wonderful friend of mine named Jean. A woman who loved to knock over dominoes. A woman who, in one sense, decided her life purpose was to knock over dominoes. Jean was a member of our church in Houston. One afternoon, I decided to make some visits to people in their homes. I went to the first home. I rang the doorbell. They opened the door, and they said, "Oh, Jean was just here." Well, we had a nice visit, and I went to the next house and knocked on the door, and they opened the door and said, "Oh, Jean was just here." And now I'm getting a little, I don't know what. I said, "How far ahead of me is she?" They said, "Just a few minutes." I left and I went to the next house. I knocked on the door. They opened the door, and I said, "When did Jean leave?" And they were shocked, and they said, "Well, just a few minutes ago." I never caught up to Jean that day, but boy, that day really made an impression on me. I've never forgotten it. House after house, person after person, Jean went by to bring a word of good cheer, a listening ear, a thoughtful smile, and a big heaping dose of love. At each home, she knocked over a domino. I wonder what happened in those homes after Jean made her visit. Did those people then make a call to someone else? Did they sit down and write a note to someone they were thinking of? Did they bake a batch of cookies or a loaf of bread? You knock a domino over, and you never know how far that will spread. Jean loved to play dominoes. In Houston, there are these big modern hospitals that have the latest in medicine. And there was a ministry where kids in Central America who needed surgeries that couldn't be provided where they were would fly to Houston. And then they would have their surgery at a Houston hospital. When the kids would land at the Houston airport, Jean would pick them up. She would take them to the hospital. They'd have their surgery. When the surgery was over, when the child had recovered, she'd pick them up and take them back to the airport and send them home. I wonder, when those dominoes were knocked over, when those kids got back to Central America, how far did that gift spread? Our church had mentors at a local elementary school. Jean mentored several kids. Clunk, clunk, clunk. That was over 20 years ago. What difference did it make in those kids' lives when a woman knocked over their domino with kindness and compassion and reading and playing games and showing interest in who they were? Jean wanted the members of our church to be connected with each other, so she recruited 12 volunteers. She gave each volunteer a list of members in the church and said, "Call them, write to them. If you see them at church, say hello." And she lined up 12 dominoes. Each domino had a long line of people, and then she walked and she touched them, and dun, 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 dun. What do you think happened as domino after domino? It was paid forward, it was paid forward, it was paid forward. It makes me think, what domino knocked over Jean that caused her to want to knock over other dominoes? Jean lived in New Orleans. In the 60s, a huge hurricane came through New Orleans, destroyed the city. Did somebody do something kind for Jean and her family in the wake of that destruction that encouraged her to do something kind? Jean went through a divorce that was very painful. Going through that divorce, did someone reach out to her, comfort her, encourage her. The saddest thing Jean told me was that she had a young son who was killed in an accident when he was just a boy. Did someone come and hold her in that time of great loss and give her a sense that she wasn't alone? I never found out what domino tipped over on Jean that caused her to want to spread so much love by knocking over other dominoes. I never knew until Jean's life came right to the end. She got cancer. She was dying from cancer. She called me up and said, "Wayne, come over." And I went to visit her, and by now I realized Jean's days of knocking over dominoes were done. She was in hospice care in her home. I walked into the house, and this woman under hospice care, dying from cancer, she had 2 knitting needles in her hands. I said, "Jean, what are you doing?" She said, "I'm making booties. There's some kids across the sea in a poor country that they need booties to keep their feet warm, and that's what I'm working on right now." Even in hospice care, even at the end of her life, she was knocking over dominoes, paying it forward. That day, I learned who knocked over Jean's domino. She handed me a list of scriptures and said, "These are the passages I want you to read at my memorial service." And when I looked over the passages, I realized it was Jesus who knocked over her domino. She said, "Read this one. Fear not, I have redeemed you. I've called you by name, and you are mine." Read this one. "I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. This poor woman called, and the Lord heard me." Read this one. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me." Read this one. "I am convinced that nothing in all creation can separate us from the love of God that's been given in Christ Jesus." She said, "Read this one. Though outwardly we're wasting away, inwardly we're being renewed day by day." And she said, "Read this one from Romans, the one we read today. None of us lives to himself alone. None of us dies to himself alone. If we live to the Lord. If we die to the Lord. Whether we live, whether we die, we belong to the Lord." Jean belonged to the Lord. Somewhere in her life, some time in her life, at some point in her life, Jean had been knocked over by the love of Jesus Christ, a love so rich and deep and wonderful that he gave his life on the cross for her. And she knew that intimately. She knew that personally. She knew that in her heart and in her soul. The love of Jesus knocked her over. And for the rest of her life, she went around knocking over dominoes, paying it forward. Today in our worship, we've taken some time to recognize a very special young man who understands the importance of paying it forward. I asked Kyle Dottomede if we could do something to thank him. Way back in March when our church services got canceled, Kyle's dad, Mark, said, "My son Kyle knows how to film things. Maybe he could help us film the services and we could broadcast them." For more than 20 weeks, Kyle has been with us. Faithfully, voluntarily, graciously, even happily, filming, editing, and producing our sermons. He and his family are moving in a couple weeks. And I said, "Kyle, I really think we ought to do something to thank you. And what can we do?" You know what Kyle said? He said, "Pay it forward." And when I asked him what he meant by that, he said that in his younger life, when he was a high school student, that he himself had gone through cancer. It was a difficult time. And there was an organization named the Tomorrow Fund that supported Kyle, supported his family. He said, "If you want to thank me, pay it forward. Give a gift to the Tomorrow Fund." And that's what we're going to do. And Who knows what's going to happen when the Tomorrow Fund gets that gift? Some dominoes are going to be knocked over. We'll never know what happened. But we'll know this, in the heart of one young man, he understood how important it is to pay it forward. My guess is that Kyle's dad, Mark, is pretty proud of that decision too. And so I'm going to finish with one of my favorite stories, which just happens to be about a father and his son. It's a story about a father and son living in New York City. They had a Saturday afternoon free. It was a beautiful day. They decided to go to Central Park. The mom heard about it, that they were going out, and she was so happy that they were going to spend the day together. She said, you guys go and have a great day. And she said, but hey, how about when you're done, pick up a pizza and bring it home and we'll have the pizza for dinner. They said, sure, and they went out. They walked and they talked that day. It was fantastic. The sun was shining. There was a gentle breeze. The day was glorious. They watched families, children playing in the water, running down hills, lovers holding hands, paddlers paddling boats, picnic being enjoyed. It's just a perfect father-son day. And toward the end of the day, a homeless man approached them in the park. And he looked at them and said, can you spare some change? This had been a perfect day. The father and son, they were filled with that feeling of life's blessings and goodness, and so they responded. They reached in their pockets and they grabbed every dollar bill they had and every coin they had, and they held it out to the homeless man. Can you spare some change? And they held it out to him and said, sure, take what you need. Well, when the man heard that, do you know what he did? He grabbed every single bill and every single coin, took them, and he went away thinking that he had struck the jackpot. And the father and son looked at each other and, oh, what can you do? It's been a great day anyway. And so they started heading home. And, you know, their hearts were so filled. They're walking home, and all of a sudden the dad stops and he's concerned. And the son looks at him. It's been a good day. What's wrong? He said, Dad, what's wrong? And Dad goes, the pizza. They were supposed to buy a pizza and bring it home. They'd just given away all their money. They didn't have any money to get the pizza. And the dad looks over and there's the homeless man. And they kind of roll their eyes and they decide, okay, and they walk over to the homeless man. They're embarrassed. And they say to him, you know, we're supposed to bring a pizza home, and we gave you all our money. Can you spare some change? And the homeless guy looked at them like they were crazy. And then a smile came on his face. And he reached in and grabbed every coin and every bill. And he held it out to them. And he said, sure, take what you need. Every time I think of that story, I'm reminded everything in my hands, everything that belongs to me, everything I own, everything I possess, every breath I breathe, every beat of my heart, it's all a gift. It's a gift from God. Everything I have is a gift from the God who opened his hands to me, opened his hands and held out the gift of life and gave that gift generously and freely and sacrificially. God opened his hands and gave me everything I needed. And well, what else can we do in response to that except open our hands? Open our hands to others. Take what you need. What is that? That's paying it forward. And every time we do it, another domino gets knocked over. On and on and on. Friends, that's a beautiful thing. Hallelujah. And thanks be to God. Amen.